Good evening, this is No Spin and I'm Nidhi Razdan. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan is facing the biggest threat to his political career. Opposition parties have come together and tabled a no-confidence motion against him today. His popularity has nosedived in the last couple of years. Pakistan's Parliament will now meet to debate and take up this vote on Thursday. But there is a kahani mein twist. A key ally that had revolted against Imran Khan may now support him, the PMLQ. That is after Imran Khan's party supported a senior PMLQ leader to become the new Chief Minister of Punjab. So how did things come to such a pass in the first place? First, Imran Khan has presided over a huge economic crisis, one that has seen inflation hit record highs and prices of essential commodities soar. But he's also fallen out with the all-powerful army after a tussle with the army chief over the appointment of the head of the ISI. When Imran Khan came to power in 2018, many believed it was the army that helped him and the army that held his coalition government together. However, no Pakistani Prime Minister has ever completed a full term, though no one has ever been removed through a no-confidence motion either. Whatever happens, Pakistan is all set for another period of chaos and uncertainty, and India will be watching very closely. Joining us first on the program this evening is Najm Sethi, the chief editor of the Friday Times. He also has his own television show in Pakistan and is one of Pakistan's most respected journalists. Mr. Sethi, thank you so much for being with us. Well, explain to us what exactly is going on. The opposition motion has been tabled today, but also a shot in the arm for Imran Khan, isn't it, with a key ally that had turned against him, now possibly voting in his favor. What does this mean?
Yes, well, this is a last-minute development. Until a few hours ago, it seems as though the opposition had stitched it all up, especially since this morning the resolution for the vote of no confidence was carried through quite smoothly. And we were now ticking the clock for the next 7 days when the voting would take place. But today, a couple of hours ago, one key ally, as you point out, Chaudhry Parvez Ali of the Q League, has bolted. Imran Khan invited him over to Banigala and offered him the chief ministership, and he has 5 votes which are critical when the count comes down in Islamabad in 7 days' time. And there is another ally which has 7 votes. Those 2 are critical. The opposition will need about 10-12 votes to overthrow Imran, and these 7 and 5 are very critical. 5 are now apparently the leader of the 5 has said that they will vote with Imran. And in return, he's offered them the chief ministership of Punjab. The people in Karachi, the MQM, have 7 votes. The Imran has called them over and is about to offer them the governorship of Karachi. So there's speculation that they too may bolt and may go back, as it were, to Imran Khan. In which case, then, there will be a serious numbers issue as far as the opposition is concerned. That's the bad news. The good news for the opposition is that 5 members from Balochistan have just announced their support for the opposition. So they are now +5. They need another 7. And there's another news that's coming in, which is that the Q League is split. The people who are joining Imran Khan have split. And so things are very much out in the open. It may be that even in the worst case scenario, if 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 members from Imran Khan's own party cross the floor, and right now, at least a dozen of them have said that they have openly, publicly said they're going to cross the floor. In that case, Imran is a goner again. So it's going to be a very touch and go, as it were. There's still 7 days to go, and a lot of these people can come and go. So we're going to keep the clock ticking, and excitement will continue to grow.
Well, South Asian politics is always exciting. But irrespective of the numbers, Najm Sahab, how does this play out if the army, which is all powerful in Pakistan, is less than pleased with Imran Khan, as seems to be the case here?
Yes, well, I mean, that's the big multi-million-dollar question. The army has distanced itself from Imran for very, very strong reasons, and we can go into those in a separate question. And right now they're saying we are neutral. Imran has been attacking them indirectly by saying there's no such thing as neutrality. You've got to stand in this battle between good and evil and morality and immorality. You've got to stand with me. And they've stepped back. They've basically said we've had enough. We've been supporting you, propping you up. Now we're getting a bad name because your government is both corrupt and incompetent, and people are angry. And so therefore we can't afford to be seen to be propping you up all over again. You're on your own now. Fend for yourself. The opposition smelled that this was a great opportunity and they've thrust the knife in. So that's where we are right now. If the establishment retains its neutrality, quote unquote, then Imran is gone. If the establishment steps up to help Imran again, and all they need to do is make a few phone calls to people who are thinking of going to Imran's side, they'll come back. And on the other hand, if they keep quiet, that will be taken to mean by the opposition at least that, well, they don't mind whatever we do. They are not ready to help Imran. So, it's all going to be touch and go. The speculation here is that all these comings and goings will continue. And until the last day, we will not know which way the pendulum will swing.
How did Imran Khan, though, go from being the blue-eyed boy of the army to this, where he seems to have fallen out with the army chief?
Yeah, so it's not just the army chief. Actually, he's fallen out with the core leadership of the army. And there are three reasons for that. The first is that when they brought him in, they genuinely believed that he would be able to deliver as a modern man, educated, young people with him, amenable to the idea of bringing experts in, and so on and so forth. And so they thought, we are going to be propping up a winner, even though they helped him come in with a bit of rigging here and there and so on. Number one, he's disappointed them on that count. In 4 years, he's made things worse. He's been a terrible administrator. And what has happened is that Imran has brought a bad name to himself, but in the process, the army's got it in the neck. They are the ones who brought him in, and people have now started saying that, what's the point of attacking Imran? The guys who propped him up, the guys who brought him in, they should be held responsible. So the whole hybrid regime experiment that the establishment brought forward, thinking that this would bail out the whole political system and the economy and everything else, has collapsed. So they're embarrassed because now the attack is coming, the anger of the masses is turned against the establishment. And that's never happened before. And this is happening in Punjab province. 70% of the army's rank and file come from Punjab. So you can imagine how distressed they are that they have had to bear the brunt of Imran's incompetence. And on top of that, the big thing, the big item on Imran Khan was that he's not corrupt. He will run a clean ship. Unfortunately, that's not happened. Punjab is full of stories of corruption, some involving the First Lady. This is the level of allegations. And the army has been telling Imran to get rid of your chief minister in Punjab, put up a good ship. It's very important. Punjab is 55% of Pakistan. And you got to run a good ship there. And that's been the worst administered province. That was the first thing. The second thing was, and he refused to do that. The second thing was they wanted a change in the ISI. Because they thought that the then ISI chief that had propped up Imran Khan, they thought he'd gone a bit too far in propping up a candidate who wasn't delivering. And they wanted a change in the army's ISI. And Imran said no, because he was depending on that particular general to keep bailing him out. And now, this is a very sensitive issue. It's an army post. And the army doesn't like it being taken over by a prime minister who then gets the ISI to do his political bidding. So that was the second thing. They wanted a change in command. Imran refused. Dragged his feet for 6 months. Embarrassed the army no end. Eventually he gave in, but then by the time he'd given in, there'd been a lot of bad blood. So that was the second thing. And the third was that Imran was thinking, has been thinking for some time, that he will change the army chief and bring in a more pliant army chief. This army chief was very pliant. But the fact that he couldn't take the pressure from his own colleagues who said, look, we've got to step back. He's hurting the institution. So now there's been this unwritten tension between the army chief and his colleagues and Imran. So there's been these three reasons why they stepped back. They're not helping the opposition, but they're not propping up the government anymore, which has led to this confusion and what you see happening in Pakistan today.
Well, obviously here in India, we're watching this story very closely, Najam Saab. And what do you think the implications would be for India-Pakistan ties that have been largely frozen for the last few years? And a lot of that has to do with Imran Khan's rhetoric against India and the government here. So what happens if he goes?
Well, you see, let's look at it like this. If the Prime Minister stays, there's no chance of India-Pakistan relations improving. In fact, he's using anti-India rhetoric as part of his populist plank, just as he's using anti-Americanism and the religious card to whip up public sentiment in his favor. So clearly, he doesn't really much care about what happens to Pakistan's foreign policy, what happens to relations in the neighborhood and so on. He's whipping up a lot of prejudices in the country, especially amongst the urban middle classes. And so therefore, if Imran stays, I do not think for a minute that there will be any improvement in India-Pakistan relations. On the other hand, if you recall, the army has been gently pressing him to normalize. It's been telling him that we need to normalize with India, we need to normalize with Afghanistan, we need to normalize with the Americans. Because we trade with the West and we aid and we get their loans and so on. We need to be, more sensitive and more appreciative, especially since India is now going into the American camp. We can't afford that. We've got to stay close to the ground, as it were. Imran has been making anti-American statements. Imran has been making anti-India statements. And of course, this disquiet. Don't forget, it was the army that negotiated the ceasefire, which has still continued to hold. And the army is keen on focus on the economy, geo-economics, not geostrategy. Stitch up your relationship with everybody else. Forget about jihad. Let's focus on doing good for this country now. Let's not get into wars all over again. Imran is actually not buying this. He's going the other way. This is originally Nawaz Sharif's agenda. And the army used to derail this agenda in the old days. Now the army's come around to the thing, the economy is collapsing. We need to stitch up our relationship and become a normal country, or as much as possible a normal country, especially in the neighborhood. And Imran is not playing ball.
All right. Well, interesting days ahead. Najam Sethi, always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us. Najam Sethi there of the Friday Times, one of Pakistan's most respected journalists, giving us a perspective on what's going on there. Remember, this has implications for the entire neighborhood. We're joined by Abdul Samad Yaqub, who's a spokesperson for Imran Khan's Tehreek-e-Insaf party. Also Musharraf Zaidi, who heads his own think tank. He's the founder and CEO. Also with us, KC Singh, former diplomat and strategic affairs expert, and Nirupama Subramaniam of the Indian Express, who's covered Pakistan very, very closely for many years now. Yaqub Saab, let me ask you first, are the next few days going to be a little nerve-wracking for you and your party as you count down to this vote?
Indeed, the next few days are the most crucial days of the political tenure from last 3.5 years. Indeed, when there is a political turmoil, when the members over disgruntled MNAs are bribed and were taken to the Sindh House and the Marriott, then we can expect anything. Any surprise can be expected. I mean, the political dynamics of Pakistan is entirely different from the India. I mean, we have seen that no prime minister has ever completed his term. This is the fact. I mean, now I'm started feeling like the shelf life of the prime minister is not more than 3 to 4 years. This is the fact which I cannot remain in the state of denial. So one has to accept that the fact that we can hope that we will be successful from this political turmoil, and will retain our numbers. But let's see what is going to be happen in next 3 to 4 days.
It's actually refreshing to see a South Asian politician being honest about having some nervousness ahead of a confidence vote. Normally we all say, we'll win 800 out of 500 seats in the vote. But let me ask you, Yaqub Saab, you've got, support from the PMLQ, which was actually saying earlier it would vote against the Prime Minister. So that is good news for you. But are you saying there's still some distance for you to cover to get the support you need?
I mean, we are getting the support from, as they have declared the support. Previously, they were indecisive, and now finally they came to the conclusion. But sometimes there is a feeling that things are too late now. I mean, the political temperature is very high, and hopes are getting less, because the situation is sometimes like it's a very fragile situation, uncertainty. In the morning there is something different for forecast, and in the evening it's the political temperature, political weather is just like the weather of Islamabad nowadays, unpredictable.
All right. Ambassador KC Singh, unpredictable, or do you think ultimately it really comes down to what the army is going to do?
Look, in any country, any government basically has to cope with the people and the opposition. In Pakistan, in addition, there is the army, and it seems Mr. Sethi explained it very well, that Prime Minister Imran Khan has offended all three. So he doesn't seem to have any friends amongst the three different pillars which he can utilize. In addition, I think he's been a bit of a economically, you can't blame him, because I think generally because of COVID, because of disturbed conditions all over the world, economies have been doing badly all over the world. So that's caught up with him. And then, I have mentioned this before. He was seen in Moscow the day Putin was invading Ukraine. Now that would have sent a signal to the old friends of Pakistan, which would have then fed it into the army. That this is an absolute no-no. When the entire Western alliance is opposing Putin, Pakistan Prime Minister standing there, I think he misread the transition of the world. He probably thought in the new bipolar world. He is on the side of China and Russia. And that will suit him much better. That will suit Pakistan much better. But even the Chinese are stepping back a little. They realize the implications of the Ukrainian escapade are serious for them. Shanghai, as we speak, is under literally lockdown because of COVID there. So supply lines, supply chains are affected, trade is affected, inflation is there, energy prices are up. I think any prime minister will have a difficulty. And a prime minister who's got the opposition, who's upset everybody in the country, obviously has a greater difficulty. So I see it very difficult for him to stay on. He may last a few more weeks, but I doubt he's going to last much longer.
Musharraf Zaidi, does the opposition have its act together genuinely? Because much like the Indian opposition, it was sort of very frayed and disunited in the beginning, and this one cause seems to have really brought them together. So do they really have an alternative in place if he goes?
Well, Nidhi, there is an alternative in place, but I would not attribute what's happening now to the width of the opposition or the fact that the opposition has done something differently than what it's been doing for the last 3.5 years. And for the last 3.5 years, it's largely been licking its wounds. Now, a lot of those wounds have been, it has had to endure those wounds because of the vindictiveness and the small-mindedness of the Prime Minister and the PTI. But regardless, this moment right now and the crisis that Pakistan faces from a political perspective is not the genius of the opposition. This is what was discussed earlier in the program. It's a function of the Prime Minister falling foul of the military and security establishment's good books. This is obviously a natural state for every elected leader in Pakistan, whether they're elected with a thumping majority or the thinnest of minorities. But the opposition really doesn't have a leg to stand on as far as how vigorous it has been in terms of pursuing their agenda against the Prime Minister. And I'll also say, I mean, Casey mentioned, and he's absolutely right, he mentioned COVID-19. I think there's a lot of evidence that actually Prime Minister Khan has managed the COVID-19 crisis exceptionally well relative to the region, but also globally. There's sort of glowing reviews of how Pakistan managed COVID, both from an economic policy standpoint and from a public health standpoint, with the World Bank and The Economist and other sort of publications indicating that sort of difference. So I'm not sure that this is either the genius of the opposition or poor performance. Now, the Prime Minister has not been a superstar by any stretch, and there's been lots of weaknesses and a lot of own goals. But as you said, suffering.
The bottom line is the relationship
right
with the military. The bottom line, as you said, is that absolutely. Yeah. Nirupama Subramaniam, you've written about this extensively. I thought it was interesting what Najam Sethi was saying, that if Imran Khan stays, there's really no hope for India-Pakistan ties, and how the military seems to have taken a more nuanced position on this. But Imran Khan is the impediment. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, I think he's absolutely right. That is the right analysis. I think for a very long time now, I think about a year now, the army has been talking about geoeconomics. And, people here have been a bit skeptical about it, but the army has been repeating it on quite a few occasions. And then now you have the Pakistan's new national security policy, which also talks about it. So despite the posturing, I think, from the NSA and also generally the establishment in Pakistan, that there can be no forward movement in relations until we go back to status quo ante on Kashmir, I think there have been indications that they are ready to move forward on small things like trade, perhaps, and trade across the Wagah. There was a moment last year when they actually decided that they're going to do trade, and then there was a pushback from the government, and I think that was unexpected even for the people who wanted to actually wanted the state to the trade to begin. So I think there have been several indications over the last year that there are some sections of the Pakistani establishment that want to normalize relations with India, but and they are willing to have some kind of compromise on Kashmir. So maybe, I mean, if in a future dispensation, which is in waiting now, in the opposition, maybe that could take it forward.
Musharraf Zaidi, just coming back to you, I mean, is the situation that Imran Khan finds himself today really squarely on him? I mean, he was the blue-eyed boy of the army, and do you think he just squandered that?
Sure, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was the blue-eyed boy of the army. And became prime minister on the back of that. Nawaz Sharif was the blue-eyed boy of the army for many years, from the early 1980s through really, I mean, basically not soon after he became prime minister. I think it's to the great credit of General Bajwa that the relationship had lasted as long as it did. But I think Notification Gate really did a number on the civil-military, sort of very delicate civil-military equilibrium. I do think ultimately, and this is a point of contention, and it also causes a little bit of confusion when I say this. We can blame the army and civil-military relations for what they are, but the responsibility for fixing this, the responsibility for surviving and thriving as a civilian leader in this country is squarely on the prime minister, whoever that prime minister might be. If you're an elected civilian prime minister, you occupy the most powerful seat in the country. That's why these conflicts emerge. So the challenge for whether it's Nawaz Sharif or it's Imran Khan, or tomorrow at some point in the future, it's Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, or if we go the way of India and we end up electing something, dramatically more right-wing, no matter who the prime minister is, the conflict with the military is a natural consequence of the fact that the prime minister is constitutionally, morally, and ethically the most powerful person in the country. And when that power is challenged, this conflict emerges. So the responsibility, therefore, also lies in that office. So it's unfair what's happening with Imran Khan. I, frankly, my position, and I mean, you would know this, Nidhi, others might, I know, Casey knows this, I'm not a PTI or an Imran Khan supporter by any stretch of the imagination, but I absolutely think he should have been allowed to complete his term and get voted out. And the fact that he's being manipulated and maneuvered out of office in this way is going to lead to a resurgence in support for him and more headaches for Pakistan down the road.
Okay, I just have one final question to Ambassador Casey Singh. Why isn't the army then going by the traditional route, the coup route? I mean, no Pakistani Prime Minister has been voted out by a no confidence vote before. So why are they letting this play out then this way?
No, I think General Bajwa, army has probably taken a decision that they don't want a military coup. They've seen what follows when there's a military coup. They saw Musharraf's thing. They don't want to go down that route. At the moment, it may come later if there's uncertainty, instability, because we are not going to get instantaneous change. Even if the government falls, I don't think there's another prime minister in the waiting. If Pakistan was to go to election, there'll be an interim government. And that government will have to wait. And the interest between PPP and PML, Muslim League of Nawaz Sharif, will immediately be different once the elections are announced. They are together today because the interests are aligned. But they'll not be aligned if the elections are announced. And Musharraf makes a valid point that Imran Khan may just be a third person in that race. So we don't know how it plays out, because he's been following a populist, right-wing populist agenda. And that may just play out all right.
And ultimately, I guess India will have to wait and see what happens when there is an election next year, and just wait and watch. I'm out of time. I wish we could continue this conversation. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us this evening on this big story. Let's see whether Imran Khan does manage to survive or whether he's actually on his way out. See you again tomorrow night. Goodbye.